Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CFO Leadership Forum, Future of Finance. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we'll turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. First, we would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsors, SAP, Brex, and Lease Accelerator. Our sponsors are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. Also, be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I would like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we have curated based on the feedback we have received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during today's session, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us today. Now, let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Marco Rossi, Head of Finance, Siemens Healthcare Diagnostics. We're super excited to have Marco for his opening keynote presentation titled The Elements of Finance Strategy for Success. Welcome, Marco. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome from wherever you're dialing in. I'll be talking a little bit about how I think about strategy, right? So this is not supposed to be a one size fits all, but it's a little bit about the journey that we did here at Siemens Healthineers when it comes to SCM finance strategy. So to start us off, right, and you will have many different opportunities during the presentation to ask questions and to chime in. There will be some polls also, so keep an eye out on your right-hand side. There will be some questions there because I would like this to be most interactive and not just a front-facing lecture. So in order that we speak the same language, I would like to introduce what I have been using and the vocabulary that I will be using. It's all out of, which is a book I can wholeheartedly recommend called Strategic Management: A Cross-Functional Approach. It's an excellent book, and it's a very hands-on book, so it doesn't feel like it's something completely out there, but something that is very easily put into action. It's also, interestingly enough, typically used for go-to-market. So in terms of what you want to sell and how you're going to get there. So I took a leap of faith that this will, if it works for go-to-market, will work for internal strategy definition also. And it was beautiful, right? So it's agnostic to the type of strategy I found that you want to that you're looking for defining, right? So let's just refresh ourselves. So strategy is, of course, the gap from where you are currently to where you want to go, right? It requires a certain thinking beyond the immediacy of the now, right? To set time apart to think about strategy. Oftentimes I've heard, well, yeah, strategy is important, but we got all these reports to run, so we'll do that later, right? Which is tragic at best, right? But it can really be fundamentally shaking a company completely, directing them in the wrong direction. Yeah? And it requires some analytical conceptual abilities, right? So higher level thinking. So it's definitely something that, yes, we should set time apart, but it's something that you, I would recommend you dive wholeheartedly in, and it's not like a side whenever you have 5 minutes left, right? You do this, but you really need to look at this as a core function, right? And not something that is, yeah, we do when we have time for it. It needs to be a priority, quite frankly. Yeah. So the in the strategic management book that I referenced, right, there's 5 very key subjects that I mentioned. So the arena in which you operate, so the periphery, right, where will you be active? Under what circumstances will you operate, right? Are you in the middle of an M&A, right? Are you going IPO? Are you expanding? Are you in the middle of a transformation? Is there new owners, new management team coming in, right, with their own ideas? How are you going to align with that? So that's, think about this as the Colosseum, the arena in which you will have to do battle, right? Then what's so special about you, right? So how will you differentiate yourself in that arena, right? What competitive advantage will you, and then you take it really to your function, finance in my case, right? What competitive advantage will I provide? And how will I set myself apart from the finance department of my competitor? That also means I have to understand their strategy, right? And how I will be different, because they, guess what? They operate in the same arena, at least when it comes to customer, markets, government affairs, right? So there's a lot of commonality there. So I need to understand what will I bring to the table, right? What will you have to ask yourself? What will you bring to the table that really will provide that competitive edge? And so once you have defined where you operate, where you want to go, well, then you need the vehicle, right? In order to move your organization to where you are currently, to what that future state is, right? That vision that describes that future state, how you're going to get there. It's not enough to just say, well, this is where I want to go, without also clearly thinking about how to get there. Otherwise, you'll just remain where you are, obviously, right? So, and vehicles include skill set. It includes, thinking about, well, do I need to hire that skill set? Can I develop it internally, right? We'll think about things like process automation later. You'll hear about it in the rest of the CFO forum, but there's vehicles that once you define what you want yourself. So if you, for example, say, I will set myself apart with accelerating my quoting process, that I can create quotes within 24 hours after receiving the input, because that's the competitive advantage, because we are in a rapid expansion and this is the arena in which I operate, then you will find that a vehicle might be, you need to be very good in, turning that engineering request around in a financial quote, right? So you might find that in order to do that, you need a new software or a new skill set, right? Or an entire different communication strategy, because you can't have these different approvals levels slow you down in order to do that, right? So this is all about how you're going to do this. And once that is clear, you need to think about staging and timing. So you want to do everything at the same time, or is there a certain logical sequence, right? Putting my socks on, then the shoes, right? Or chewing gum and walking at the same time, right? So what kind of problem are you working with? And a deliberate staging and timing, right? So meaning what depends on one another, and what are you willing to sacrifice that okay, if I do it in parallel, it's not going to be as good as doing it in sequence, but I still, sacrifice the staging for the timing, or the other way around. Nope, this absolutely needs to be error-free. Otherwise it's garbage in, garbage out. And I need to do the timing first before, to get the staging right. It all culminates in the end in what value add you will provide, right? So you as a function, I as a function, managing the SCM function is, so what value add will that bring, right? What percentage growth, what EBIT contribution will I as the function enable SCM to provide to the business, right? So this is important, because this forms later on, when you talk about strategy, right? That you have that common vocabulary and it's shared with your business, so that when you talk about vehicles and the staging timing, that it's clear to everybody what exactly you mean by that, right? So and it's really fundamental. So when we now apply this, right? So I took this and I said, well, what's the arena in which I operate? Right? What do I do? And I said, well, let me, and this is where you bring in stakeholders and team members, right? So this is a top management strategy definition, in my opinion, is not a democratic process because it has to be top down. But the input collection and the taking hold and taking inventory of what the arena is absolutely needs that, right? You need it from your team, from your peers, and from your superiors, right? So, and I said, well, to make it super simple, right? Because in the end, it's not rocket science, I believe, but I said, if I had to really describe what I'm doing in finance, it comes down to three things. It's the reporting, right? I do controlling, accuracy, books and records, and all these other things. And then there's also this idea of the elusive crystal ball, right? Simulation, predicting the future, and if not that, then at least probability sets and confidence ranges, right? And so you see how I took, and I started with the arena. I said, so what do I do? What do I operate, right? And then I thought, well, what's differentiating us, right? What's the objective? What do I need to get really, really good at? And why do I do this in the first place? And again, it doesn't. It's not a claim on completeness. It's more the process of thinking about these things, right? So when we speak later, also in the polls, think about this not as the glass of water you need to drink, but more like the pool of water in which we need to swim, right? So there could be stuff missing here, but it gets us close enough to what I want to convey, I hope. So I said, well, reporting I do in order to visualize performance, right? Visualization of data. I could, of course, send my business partner a big spreadsheet, and I'm sure we've all been guilty of that, where you need a microscope to go with it and really see what's going on. But unless you expect them to be a full-fledged CPA and a finance analyst that can really pick out and be like, oh, here's the point where here's what's happening, right? Then you need some sort of intuitiveness, easy to grasp, right, of this report. It doesn't need, what I mean by that, it doesn't need to be pretty, right? It doesn't need to be with lots of animations, but it needs to be like the Swiss clock that I highlight here as the quintessence, right? When you look at a Swiss clock here, it's immediately clear what the time is. You don't need a PhD. You look at it, but it's 2:30, right? There's no question about it. It's high quality and it's very easy to grasp. Everybody knows how to deal with that, right? So it's not time consuming and it's easy to digest. Okay. And then I said, well, then I do things also in this, sphere of controlling. Of course, accuracy of books and records is number one, because if that's not given, then everything else is off. And here, what I found is that the objective that I was giving, and this is over like now 20 years in many different roles in finance, but I found that if not carefully fine-tuned, controlling sometimes can be one-dimensional. And what I mean by that, it has the quintessence almost of a crime scene investigator, right? A product profitability drops. Marco, go find out why that is, right? Who screwed this up? At what time should we have, seen this? And all good questions, right? But in the end, you can do all the post-mortem that you want. The problem will not you can take learnings and carry them into the future, sure, but that particular problem that you're investigating, you will not solve by a post-mortem. That has already happened. And so what I found is oftentimes it felt like crime scene investigation. Find the culprit, right? But the person is still perished. So it's not gonna, no matter, no degree, right? No amount of investigative work will bring that person back to life. So it was gravitating to underperforming businesses, and it's primarily backwards looking. Sure, always with the intent, right, to say, well, let's extract the learning, but there is, there's blood on the floor, and you need to figure out like what happened. So this idea of crime scene investigation, and I use these quintessences in the next slide so you can see, because I wanted to start thinking about them differently to really get me to where I wanted the finance function to end up, right? So again, strategy being where you are and how you then going to go to this higher place, right? This vision, and then defining vehicles along the way, what will enable you, right? So that's important. And then I said, what I really should be doing is all the stuff about intelligence, right? Price elasticity models, data scenario, like data analytics, end of life simulations, right? Creating financial models that basically work in not hard facts, but probabilities, right? What if I increase the probability of this event occurring by 15%? What will the financials then look like, right? I was like, oh, geez, I need to like start from the beginning and calculate it all. And I'll come back in 2 weeks and tell you. That is not good enough, right? It needs to be something where you can say, without you asking me a specific question, I can already predict when it gets close to break even. And unless we are close to this bandwidth of probability, it's a no, it's a non-starter, right? So this financial ever elusive crystal ball is another one. So if you could look at the polls for a second. So again, it's on the right-hand side. I would love to hear from you, right? If you have, yourself a articulated strategy in place, right? And where you spend most of your time, right? So we did a full-blown analysis, and I looked at, RACI charts, and we did some like where my team spends most of their time. And what I'm seeing in the polls, like 40, almost 50% of you are saying, I'm spending most of my time on doing reports, right? Then some controlling, and very 20% intelligence. This is the highest value add that you can give, right, to the organization. And what you are saying is basically what I found too, right? So let me show you what I mean. I'll progress through the slides here a little bit faster. And I said, well, the as-is situation, if I'm really honest with myself, I'm doing a lot of reporting. Some of the reporting I do, I don't even know why I'm doing them. And I don't mean this sarcastic, right? That's really a fact. Like when we started looking at some of the reports my team was sending out, people that have been doing them for a long time, they have been hard pressed to tell me who actually asked for this in the first place. And then when looking at distribution lists, we're like, these guys are not even here anymore, right? Why you sent this out? When we follow up and we dig a little deeper, we find out that sometimes an ad hoc request, an event like the pandemic, right, where raw material prices have gone through the roof, and maybe the requirement of doing like a broker report, right, is absolutely critical. Post-pandemic, if somebody turns that faucet off, right, that's still going to drain resources, right? So what we did is we looked at what are all the things that we're doing, right? Where we're spending time, and I'm glad to see that at least 20%. In my case, it was much less, right? I said I can't even get to the stuff I want to, and I know this is really going to move the needle because I'm doing all this other stuff. And so the desired ratio, please don't read this as I need to cut my number of reports down. This is the time I want to spend on these topics. So it could even be that I maybe add reports, right? But I don't want to spend a lot of financial analytics and precious You all know how difficult it is to get good financial analysts, and there is a war on talent and all of this. So you need to figure out how you can still satisfy what the company needs, but I want to spend less time on it. And why do I do that? Because I want to spend more time on controlling, and I want to also change, right, this paradigm shift, what controlling is and what it should be, right? Rather than focusing on backward looking who made this mistake, right? This news crew, this news team that shows up after the accident or the crime has happened, and it's like, we're reporting live from the, I want to be super close to the business, right? I want to be there while it happens, so I can say, hey, something is going wrong. If Marco doesn't hit the brakes, he's gonna run somebody over, right? And before that actually happens, and spending all this effort in figuring out what happened and how bad the damage is and so on. So I want to be able to be right there next to my business partner saying, this is going the wrong way. You need to do something. You need to counter correct right away, right? And here are 3 options. Which one do you want, right? This one has the highest chance of success. This one a little bit less, but it's also less expensive. And it needs to be very, very fast, right? And the intelligence piece, and I personally think artificial intelligence is an absolute must for all of us to delve into, but it's also much overused. So I'm by training an electrical engineer, industrial engineer, and I explained this to one of my staff, and I said, sometimes human intelligence is good enough, right? It's like all you need. Just use your brain. You don't need to run and get a big data model. It's just take a sample, make it statistically significant, right? And I know I don't do the topic justice, but if you want to figure out if the river in front of your house is polluted, you don't measure the entire river. You take a sample. And if that sample comes back and it says, yep, there's definitely lead in this river and it's polluted, that's all I need to know, right? I don't need to measure the entire river. I don't need to have all of this data flow through. Now, sometimes I do, right? And that's when absolutely I need those machine learnings. But sometimes, and that's why I said I wanted to keep this as just intelligence and not artificial intelligence, because this is just the analytics space, okay? So what I will show you next, right, is how I brought all of this together, because what can seem like a daunting task, right? And it's good to also see that most of you say, I do absolutely have that. I have a well-articulated strategy. I would challenge you, if that's the case, right? Because I thought so too when I first joined. It's like, oh, you don't need to work on that. We have that already. It's like, oh, okay. So I said, so I can ask my business partner, what's the finance strategy, right? Because if that's well articulated and everybody's on board, he should be able to tell me that. And that's when things started to get interesting, because they had a different understanding what finance strategy should or shouldn't be, right? It's like, oh, you will send me this list of reports, right? I was like, yeah, but that's not the strategy, right? So in order to litmus test this for yourself, right, if you're truly convinced, ask your business partner to tell you what he thinks your strategy is, and then you'll know if you really have one that's well articulated and out there for everybody to understand, because it's almost like an armor, right? You can, there's nothing proprietary about this information that I'm going to show you. A screenshot or just copying this does not do it justice, because you have to train in your armor. You have to be able to move in it, right? So what we came up with is on the next slide, because that's the definition and now you see me using words, and that's why I wanted to start with this, right? So it's a little bit, so you don't need to read this really. We just did this on the slide, right? But where I want to be is summarized in this very last sentence, right? We want to become a competitive advantage to our business. I don't want to just do reports and controlling. I want to be where my business partner comes to me and says, we will make no fundamental decision until Marco and his team has looked at this, because we might miss something. Finance then becomes not the place where dreams go to die, right? And no, there's no budget for that. Or it's like, oh, here he comes with his microscopic reports, but it's like, no, we want his opinion on this because he has steered us right in the past. Taking a screenshot of this or copy and pasting and just putting your name in there won't do anything. It's just you're putting on armor, but you're clumsy in it because you haven't made it your own. Okay. So it needs to be communicated, trained. You need to have people really give feedback. You don't print this out and put it in the bottom of your drawer. It needs to be something that you live and breathe every day. It needs to be at every meeting that you do with your team, right? First page until they are nauseated by it, right? So let me show you, and then we move into questions. But if you don't remember anything, I guarantee you'll remember the next thing I'll show you. So this idea of running as fast as your business partner, not showing up when the story is already done and reporting on it from a distance, right? Time or really distance-wise. I want you to think about, when you think strategy, I want you to keep this in mind. And I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully you get a good chuckle out of it too.
150 to go, and Melangeni is holding on. Alfonso on his shoulder. Zolani's not out of it either. It's anybody's race. Can anyone catch Melangeni? Oh, maybe somebody can. Is that our cameraman? He's matching him stride for stride. He's run the whole race with a camera on his shoulder. Just incredible. Melangeni will get the gold. The cameraman the glory.
So, you know, being a little bit, and my team loves this, right, when I show them this. So the idea of, you want to be right there where the action happens, right? And be able to counter and course correct and not come in afterwards and just send a report out 5 days after the closing, exactly telling everybody why we missed the forecast, right? That's just a fact. But as it happens, saying, oh my God, we need to increase the speed of how we turn this particular quote around because the customer's not going to go for it otherwise, right? That's where the value comes in my opinion. But again, it was, so thank you for your time. This would conclude. And then, of course, I am happy to receive your questions, and if there are concerns, or if this sounded like a little bit too much like the Brave New World, if you say, you know, I'm not sure about this, but love to hear your feedback and your questions. So thank you for tuning in, and now let's see what kind of questions we have.
Great. Yeah, here's one, Marco, from the audience. How do the roles of reporting, controlling, and intelligence differ in their contribution to finance team success?
Yeah, it's a good question. The reality is sometimes you have many different, so especially in small teams, you don't have a reporting and a controlling and an analytics team. In smaller teams, or if you have even big teams, but they're distributed through sites, you have to have that skill set where somebody is good in reporting and can basically do all these things in difference. And I'm not sure if I'm going to go back on the slides. They are, of course, interconnected, right? There is this linkage between the different pieces because they will feed on one another, okay? What I mean by that is a report, right? Because, oops, sorry about that. A report that you distribute might create a question from a management team member, right? Board member. And that ultimately might lead to the need to say, oh, well, we don't know, but it's a good point. We don't know what caused this flicker, right? This spike in the data. We need to model it, right? We need to understand what really caused it. So they feed off one another. You can't go straight to intelligence, in my opinion. You need to start with the reporting, right? Then see questions that you want to investigate, and then say, this is not good enough that we only find out about this stuff after closing, but we need for this particular topic we need some sort of data model or simulate this, right? So they are really interconnected. So by no means should you take away that reporting is less important than intelligence. They're all important. They're part of the ecosystem. All I'm saying, it's like a well-balanced diet almost. If you just eat French fries, right, and don't put these other ingredients into your mix of capability set, you're gonna get sick, right? You're not gonna be able to thrive as an organization, right? But you need all of these components to be integrated with one another. Would be my answer to that. Thank you. It's a great question, though.
Great. Yeah. And thank you again, Marco, for an excellent keynote. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. And as a reminder, please be sure to check out the prizes and raffle rules section to see how you can earn points for the chance to win one of several prizes. Our next session will begin at 11:35 a.m. Eastern Time, which will be a panel discussion titled Cultivating the Best Finance Team for Long-Term Success. Please click the join button that will appear on your screen to be redirected to the next session, and we look forward to seeing you there.